Okay, you picking me up on my mic? Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with this thing the last 2 weeks. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thanks for the day. We pray that you'll bless our time together. And as we discuss some pretty heavy topics, bless us today in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, today we're going to talk about escalating everything. I mentioned this last week. I used this at the conference I spoke at in California recently. This is sort of what my brain looks like on Sunday mornings when I start to rearrange my just make every one of those little jots and tittles there a PowerPoint slide, so I have to organize that into some kind of coherent fashion. So this is what I talk about each week: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And today we're talking about escalating everything, because that's the term that everybody was using this week. Escalation, escalation this, escalation that, escalation violence, escalation in inflation, escalation in government control, escalation in war in the Middle East, and that type of thing. So it is a crazy time. And Daniel says in Daniel chapter 12, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." And so one of the goals that we have around here is to be wise people who understand what's going on. You know, just like the sons of Issachar were commended for understanding the times in which we live. We want to understand the times in which we live. I'm making a note to myself, which I probably will never remember to look at again, but that's... And today, by the way, I'm not going to get through near everything that I have prepared. I have some interviews scheduled this week with some different people, try to schedule some more. So we'll do the best we can. I've been updating my little chess slide here as time goes by with the different, for example, now I have the Hezbollah pawn and the Hamas pawn, which are controlled by Iran. And then we have Russia, Turkey, Israel, and we'll be adding more as this. We need to add a pawn down here in Yemen for the Houthis, and then we have to add a separate king thing for the Saudi Arabia, UAE. It's really kind of an insane time in which we live. And I'm not the only one who uses chess pieces. This is a guy, this is JUSOOR website. It's a think tank that mostly focuses on Syria. And he's prone to use this sort of chess thing a lot. As I said, he focuses on Syria. So you see Syria as a chessboard, and there's Russia in Syria there. By the way, before I forget, I was looking back through some things that I never got to. There was a U.S. report that was released recently that said that Ukraine was sending special forces to both Syria and Sudan. Now you're thinking like, well, wait a minute, don't they have enough to handle with Russia slaughtering a lot of people? There's reports, I don't know if I have a slide on this today, that the death toll in Ukraine, between Ukraine, Russia, civilians and that type of thing, is probably over 1 million people now. I mean, think about it. That's like a little bit less than the whole city of Columbus, or around what the city limits of Columbus would have, are gone in 2 years. Sudan, where the Ukraine Special Forces have been fighting against who in Sudan and against who in Syria? They're going after Russian soldiers, Russian mercenaries in Syria, because they're trying to create more problems for Russia, so that Russia has to respond and therefore take their eye off the ball in Ukraine. Now, Russia has taken back, I hear, most of the land that Ukraine had taken over recently. But that whole, it's just interesting that Ukraine's messing around in other countries. And so that has geopolitical implications as well. about everything. So let's talk about the big news of the week. So most of this is going to focus on Israel. You might see some images that are a little bit disturbing to you about some of the things that happened in Lebanon this week. These were the headlines all over the place Wednesday morning. Tuesday, it came out that about 3:30 in the afternoon in Lebanon on Tuesday, pagers started exploding. And these were pagers that had been issued to Hezbollah people in Lebanon. By Hezbollah to Hezbollah people, Hezbollah operatives, and people associated with Hezbollah. And a lot of people say, well, there was just a doctor. Well, they're doctors that are working and largely paid for by Hezbollah. And the pagers that they had just started exploding. It was an ingenious operation. I'll talk a little bit about this off and on, but in summary, the people received a message, a couple beeps and a message. They picked it up to look at it, and it exploded. It's had tremendous things. For example, here's a guy in a checkout line at a grocery store, and you can see what happens here. His pager exploded. Now, the interesting thing about that is that he appears to be the only one injured. So I think that there are ways. Now, how did Israel do this? So they took these pagers, which are really kind of not the latest technology, and they went in, they got a hold of these. Now, there's a lot of question about how they got a hold of these. Some people are saying, well, the Mossad manufactured them, but they took one of the batteries, it's believed, out of the pager device and replaced one of the batteries with an explosive, a high-yield explosive. And it's interesting that the battery weighs about 23 grams, and the reports are that the explosive was about 20 grams. So it was an ingenious operation. It appears that these pagers were interdicted. There were many thousands of casualties. There were many deaths, probably 4 or 5 dozen deaths, although there's some estimates of the death toll being 10 times or more that amount. For example, here's a graphic that analyzes what happened in the grocery store video that you just saw. The pager explodes, but it doesn't hurt anybody around him. And in this respect, some of the Israeli, and we'll have a lot of comments about what happened, because this was the most, whether you like Israel or not, this was the most ingenious, sophisticated, massive attack by an intelligence service in human history. There's nothing that even comes close to matching it. Now, how did they do this? Did they manufacture these? It appears that they interdicted the shipment of these pagers to Hezbollah. Now there's reports this morning that they were able to get them held in a customs warehouse somewhere for 2 months. While they were at that customs warehouse, now, by the way, Israel's not claiming responsibility for this. I think it's fair to assume who did it. But whoever did it got a hold of these pagers, took them apart, replaced the battery, and they had to replace the battery so that no one would know. There's some indication that a couple Hezbollah operatives were complaining about the battery life of the pager. Which is pretty common. Everybody complains about the battery life of their iPhone, or I don't know if people do that have an Android or not. I'm sure that your battery runs out at the least opportune time on your personal device. So whoever was in charge of this operation was concerned that they'd been found out. So they gave the order set them off now, even though that may not have been when they wanted to set them off. It's believed that these were going to be set off at some point. If it's Israel, they would set all these pagers off, blind Hezbollah. They would not be able to use their communication devices. They wouldn't be able to communicate with one another, and then they could do their invasion. They may have had to do that a little bit earlier than they had planned. But this was, apparently there were 5,000 or more of these pagers that had been altered. It's an amazing thing. So here's a little tweet from Open Source Intel that talks about who was responsible for this. Now, there's been a lot of memes, jokes. For example, some people call this operation the Grim Beeper operation, that it was headed up by a special intelligence officer named Ahavi Beeper. So listen, this is just sort of a summary of it. Hezbollah operatives were targeted through individually detonated pagers, with attackers knowing exactly who and where the targets were. Now it's coming out that they weren't set off as a group, they were set off individually. They knew where the people were, they were tracking them, they knew they were in a grocery store, they knew they were here, and they set off these pagers to explode. The pagers were designed to look normal, ensuring the person carrying them wouldn't suspect tampering. The attack, conceived by a young female intelligence officer, about 30 years old, injured thousands, but was designed to avoid killing bystanders. There were a few instances of children or other bystanders being killed, but for the most part, the people injured, the people killed, were Hezbollah terrorists. And we use the term operative. That's kind of a nice name for these people. They're monsters. In my view, they're subhuman, given the way that they are. And some of the people that were killed over this past week, in addition to this Grim Beeper operation, these people were some of the worst, most despicable human beings ever to walk the planet. They would starve Arabs in Syria. And Hezbollah is operative in Syria. And by the way, across the Arab world, there's a lot of people that are praising this operation because they don't like Hezbollah either. They're terrible, monstrous, and I don't like to call them human beings, but I guess I have to. Hezbollah increased pager use after fearing phone communication vulnerabilities. More about that in a moment. The attack aimed to pressure Lebanon's health system and damage Hezbollah's domestic support. And it has to some extent, but it's also increased Hezbollah's support. That's the way these work. Channel 12 in Israel reported the pager detonation operation was not a strategic strike, and that Israel has far more powerful capabilities developed over years for use against Hezbollah and Iran. Now process that. This isn't the best that Israel has, if it's Israel that did this. They've got more sophisticated things that they can do. A former national security advisor added that thousands of Israelis have been working to develop these security capabilities, and there are more advanced options yet to be used, particularly in Lebanon. This was one editorial cartoon that I found, and they're calling it the greatest covert military op since the Trojan horse, and it probably exceeds the Trojan horse. Now, the disadvantage of an operation like this is you can really only use it once. You use it once, that opportunity is gone. But they were able to do some other things, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So here's a picture of Lebanon looking to the southern suburbs where that's a Hezbollah stronghold. And about this time, these things were going off almost simultaneously all over Lebanon, all over Hezbollah areas. And there are also reports, I've not been able to confirm them, that maybe 15 to 20 Iranian Revolutionary Guard people were killed in Syria when their pagers went off because they had pagers out of the same group. Now, I'm still trying, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to figure out what went on. So here is the, and so how did they get there? Well, for a long time, you have to understand that intelligence people will, and security people will look at what the enemy is saying, and then they'll design an operation to sort of undermine what they're saying to their own people. For example, this is a Hezbollah released footage. This is back in October of 2023. So 11 months ago, just 2 weeks after the October 7th attack in Gaza, Hezbollah released footage titled "We Blinded Them" at Quran terminology, revealing recent operations targeting Israeli surveillance and spy hardware on the Lebanese border. And so what they did was they released this video, and what they did was they had these missiles, rockets, mortars, and everything that attacked Israeli listening stations. And if you've been up to the Golan and the Lebanon border, as I've been able to do, you'll see these towers around, and these are listening posts. So, for example, when Pam and I were up in the Golan, I use it in the royal we sense. I was driving, so I decided to go down this road, but she didn't tell me not to do it, so she's just as guilty, I guess. And we started driving through this rusty gate with a rusty UN sign, and I suddenly realized that I was entering the area of no man's land on the Syrian Golan border. Probably not a good place to be, especially since ISIS is just on the other side of the fence at the time. But then when I turned around and went out, I looked up on the mountain there, and they have a listening post. And I thought, there's IDF soldiers up there getting a good laugh at these stupid Americans driving around, thinking that Google GPS is actually going to work all that well up here. And the IDF, by the way, has been hacking GPS up in the northern part of Israel. Part of that is because Hezbollah will use GPS to target places in Israel. But what they've done is they've hacked GPS. So if you go up there, I've had Israeli friends tell me this, if you go up to the north now and you put in something in your coordinates in your iPhone or Google Maps, it will give you directions to Beirut. So when they put stuff in the GPS, it supposedly, unless they're overcoming it, which I think they probably figured out how to do that now, it would make Beirut a target of their missiles. That's how intelligence services work. So but listen to the terminology. A year ago, Hezbollah was releasing videos on Al-Manar, their media website. Go look it up, almanar.com.lb. Open it in Chrome, and you can just click in the upper in the URL box, and you'll get an English translation of everything, and you can watch all these videos. And what they say now, it doesn't translate the videos, but they're saying we blinded them. In February, Nasrallah, earlier this year, Nasrallah gave a speech. Now, if you remember, everybody was anticipating Nasrallah's speech. Everybody says he's giving a speech, he's going to announce this, he's going to talk about war, and we're going to war with Israel, because they'd already started. The day after the attacks in Gaza, they were already launching rockets, mortars, missiles, and that sort of thing from southern Lebanon into Israel. And so Nasrallah, everybody was anticipating the speech, and buried in the speech, which a lot of people didn't catch, and this is a translation of what he said. Nasrallah said this in February of 2024, "The cell phone is a listening device. So we ask our brothers in the border villages and throughout the south especially the fighters and their families, to dispense with their cell phones in order to preserve the safety of people's blood and dignity. The cell phone is a deadly agent that provides specific and deadly information. And they knew this because part of what happened in Gaza was that someone had acquired cell phone data, not necessarily cell phone specific to a particular cell phone, but cell phone cloud maps of activity. So they were able to determine by looking at those, Hamas was in Gaza, where the safe room was in a kibbutz or a home. Because they could tell that the people came in and they stopped at a particular door. If they stopped at a door, that meant that the door was locked. If they just went in, that showed that the door was unlocked. So it gave the Hamas people coming across the border that day, the terrorists, they knew which doors would be unlocked, and they knew where the safe rooms were so they could attack the people. And they got all of that by acquiring publicly available cell phone data. If you remember when the pandemic started, there are big New York Times articles about privacy and that type of thing. Give them credit for bringing that up. But what they did was they acquired cell phone data at the New York Times, and they could show you where all of the students on spring break in crowds that they weren't supposed to be in at the time, early in the pandemic, where they had come from and where they were gathering, and then where they went home to. And you can make that determination. So Nasrallah says, stop using cell phones. They're bad. So what did they do? Well, they said, we're going to use pagers and couriers. That's what Hamas did. Hamas went low-tech on everybody, and Israel has all these high-tech listening devices and everything, and computers and analyses, but they were blinded, in a sense, because they weren't using high-tech devices anymore. And Reuters, this is back July 9th, 2024, so what's that, 2.5 months ago, how Hezbollah used pagers and couriers to counter Israel's high-tech surveillance. So they followed up, give Reuters credit, whoever did the reporting followed up. Hey, Nasrallah talked about this in February. Are they doing anything to implement what Nasrallah said about not using cell phones? And Reuters came out and said this. But look at what the article says, July 9th, 2024. Coded messages, landline phones, pagers, following the killing of senior commanders targeted in Israeli airstrikes. The Iran-backed Lebanon militant group Hezbollah has been using some low-tech strategies to try to evade its sophisticated surveillance technology, informed sources told Reuters. It has also been using its own tech, drones, to study and attack Israel's intelligence gathering capabilities in what Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, has described as a strategy of blinding Israel. That's a Quranic term, and that was their goal. We want to blind Israel. So what did these clever intelligence people, whoever designed this operation, what did they do? They designed an operation to blind Hezbollah. So here's the front page of Al Akbar the other day. Here is a guy in bed listening to Nasrallah's speech that he gave on Thursday or Friday. Big speech, want to find out what he says. And so everybody in Lebanon was listening to it, but do you see this, what the results of this is? This guy is blinded by the exploding device because they picked it up. There were at least 500 Hezbollah fighters who've lost their eyesight. The Iranian ambassador to Lebanon lost an eye, and his other eye was severely damaged. Lebanon can't take care of these people. Lebanon is not a functioning society. Their healthcare system is terrible. The power company essentially said a few weeks ago, we're not supplying power anymore because we're out of money and fuel. So everybody has a private generator, including hospitals. But if you look at a picture of the skyline of Beirut, which is a big city, a couple million people, at night, it's virtually dark because there's no electricity. So ironically, a lot of these blinded fighters have been put on planes and they're now being sent to Iran for eye surgeries. Iran has a lot of people in Iran, women and protesters against the regime, that have been blinded by the Iranian regime. Do you catch the full circle of irony here that's going on? Here's a video, I think it's the same guy, in a hospital bed. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these people. Their hands are blown off, their fingers are blown off, their eyes are destroyed, they're blind for life. So in the Hezbollah paper, when they talk about this, it says this: so the mothers remain as proud as mountains despite the amputation of limbs, the shattering of faces and the bleeding. The wounds of the sons became medals hung on the chest. And the mothers consoled Fatima and Zainab, peace be upon them, and the family of the messenger, peace be upon him, with the looks of mothers today and their wounded sons. Now, if you look at some of the Israeli take on this, their take is, we don't really care about proud mothers. May every terrorist end up like this. May every terrorist not be a martyr. May he be a burden on his family for life. Can't use his hands, he can't see, and he has to live his whole life knowing that he's not a martyr, he's just a burden. Now, this sounds very, very cruel to us, but we think of this in Western terms, not Middle Eastern terms. And so this was and so we will make you a reminder for everyone around you not to mess with us. Now, this is from a Hezbollah, this is from the Al-Manar website, about what happened as a result of the operation. Those are coffins lining the river of life to the great paradise where they're going to meet their 72 virgins. But the damage was, there's funerals all over Lebanon. Here's a picture, a little video of a funeral in Beirut, or the southern suburbs of Beirut. You see all the Hezbollah fighters there that weren't injured. They have all their pictures there. Some of these, like for example, this guy looks like he's about 12 or 13 or 14. He was killed. And so the people who put the memorial pages up for dead Hezbollah fighters, they've been very, very busy the last few days. I mean, there are dozens of these guys have been killed. For example, here's one that was taken, this was early on, so that's 10, then it was 11, that's 12 now, 37, 49, 60 some. And what did they say though? Remember, this is what Hezbollah does for every single person that they consider to be a martyr. The Islamic Resistance mourns a group of its fighters as martyrs on the road to Jerusalem. This is not about Lebanon. It's not about northern Israel. This is about wiping out Israel and taking over Jerusalem as part of their Islamic religion. This is Ynet, 4,000 injuries. Now, I hear the number is higher. There is a document going around. I've received different takes on it. Some people, good people, smart people like Tony Badrin, who is at Across the Bay on Twitter. Great security guy, writes for Tablet Magazine. I've played some clips of him being interviewed by Carolyn Glick. Very, very smart guy. He understands that our government, the United States government, has been actively involved in pushing the Iranian agenda in the Middle East for many decades. Hezbollah has been operating, building their tunnels and everything for 40 years, over 40 years. I heard a podcast, one that you probably should listen to. It's I would call it bipartisan podcast in terms of Israeli. Well, saying bipartisan in Israeli politics is kind of a misnomer because I don't know what a multi-partisan podcast, because they get people from the left, from the center, from the right. Dan Senor, it's called Call Me Back. I would highly recommend. They only put up a couple podcasts a week. It's also on YouTube. Call Me Back by Dan Senor, Senor. And one of the guys was saying, I went up there. I went up to Lebanon. I was taken, guy said, hey, come over here. I'll show you an abandoned Hezbollah tunnel. They took me in this tunnel. It was 300 feet underground. It had beds, kitchens, rec rooms, everything underground. 300 feet. There's no bunker busting bomb on planet Earth that can reach a 300-foot deep tunnel. So when you hear somebody like the Candace Owens, she said, well, it's just a tunnel. You just blow up one end and blow up the other, and it's all done. I don't understand what the problem is. That's right. You don't understand what the problem is because you don't understand a thing about this, and your blind hatred of a certain race of people is clouding everything that you do, and you've lost the ability to reason. It's shocking what I've seen. So anyway, so Tony Badrin says this purports to be a Hezbollah document. The title at the top, when you look at the translation, doesn't seem to really square, because it says Hezbollah military wing. They don't really refer to themselves like that. So it may be a made-up document. Then I've heard other people from Israeli intelligence, TV7 in Israel, reported in their program on Friday that Israeli intelligence lends some credibility to this document. But the numbers are pretty shocking. They show that you have martyrs, 879. It's not 47 killed, it's 879. Now that seems high, but then they have other injured people, 602 very critical cases, 509 blindness cases. These seems 2,187 amputation cases. Genital tract infections and internal organs and reproductive organs in the hundreds. People had their privates blown off because it was in their pocket. It was a stunning attack. Now, what happened was, though, all those guys that went to the funerals, so people were injured, Israel's watching, they have intelligence assets on the ground, and they know all the people that went to the hospital. They know where they live, they know who their families are, and they can track all of this. So Hezbollah, so they've gone away from cell phones to pagers. That didn't work. The next day at the funerals, this is a picture of a funeral, and what do you see happening at the funeral? An explosion. And so the next day, Hezbollah went and they started using walkie-talkies. The walkie-talkies exploded. Dozens killed, injured, many of them at funerals. This was, and as some people say, and I have some video here in a little bit, this was the most moral attack on a terrorist operation ever, because it targeted the terrorists with very little collateral damage to bystanders. So the next day, there's a second wave of this. I don't know how Hezbollah is constructed, but this took out a lot of people. So here's the New York Times from Friday, and you see people sitting around wanting to listen to what Nasrallah has to say. They talked about Israel's elaborate plot. And so there's a lot of questions about where did these things come from? And this is what somebody said. You see, this is a very common picture in Lebanon now, people who are blinded. This is from the Times of London. This morning, smoke rose from his body after the walkie-talkie exploded. So on the one hand, this is a very cruel operation. I get that, okay? But these people are monsters. And so there are all these martyr pages that are being put up on the Almanar website. They're running behind. I looked at it yesterday. But again, at the bottom it says on every one of these, it gives the date of death. So this guy was killed in the operation on the 18th, or died on the 18th. In the second wave, on the road to Jerusalem, he was martyred. And what's the picture of down here in the lower left? The Dome of the Rock. This is about Israel, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. What do we talk about what's important in Bible prophecy? Israel, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. So we're going to do a conference on Saturday with Patrick Wood, Mike Spalding, Barry Stagner over in Brookville. It's called the Go Therefore Conference. You can look up the Go Therefore Conference and get information about getting the stream or attending live if you want. It's just next Saturday. Patrick Wood, by the way, will be here next Sunday morning. He'll be preaching first hour and then teaching first hour, and then he and I will probably do some things together second hour. So you want to catch that. So this is what this whole operation is about. Iran outraged after ambassador to Lebanon hurt in pager attack. By the way, what's he doing with the Hezbollah pager? Iran funds them. He's probably the Iranian go-between between the Iranian government and Hezbollah. He's not there for the Lebanese government. That doesn't really exist. He's there to meet with Hezbollah people. And he got caught up in the attack. He's blind in one eye, has a lot of damage. Now, a lot of people say, okay, is this violates international law? And you'll see one of our famous female congressmen was walking down the hall in Congress the other day being interviewed. This violates international law. So on Fox News the other night, Trace Gallagher had on the great esteemed lawyer from the UK Lawyers for Israel, a barrister in the UK. That means she goes to court. She's essentially the equivalent of a trial lawyer here in the United States. Probably, maybe a little bit better because they have a few more qualifications. But Natasha Hausdorff, trying to arrange an interview with her. She's in the United States traveling right now. So Trace asked her, hey, what about this? Does this violate international law? Here's what Natasha had to say.
Natasha, you're new to the panel, so of course you have to go first on this thing. I was fascinated by this because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was asked about the pager attacks in Lebanon, and she said the following.
U.S. Department of Defense guidelines actually explicitly prohibits the use of booby traps, and they define booby traps as non-combatant devices, cell phones, things like that, being used and have explosives hidden in them.
And sticking to her plan and her theme is it's always Hamas is right, Hezbollah is right, Israel's always wrong. What do you think?
Well, there's a certain type of individual trace that discovers international law at times like these when they believe they can use it as a weapon against Israel. What we just heard there was legally illiterate. In fact, the military manuals of the US talk about the appropriate use of booby traps. But in any event, the pages situation that we're dealing with, this extraordinary situation of Israel potentially, although we don't know who has real responsibility here, using Hezbollah issued personal pages to be able to get to Hezbollah operatives, talks about Israel's precision and its targeting and the ability to distinguish between civilians and combatants in this extraordinary fashion. You can't really think of a better example of complying with international humanitarian law.
Yeah, I see you nodding, Rabbi.
Oh, you went after the soldiers. You didn't go after the people anywhere in Lebanon. That's number one. Number two, think about this was 5 years in planning and everything was done perfect. My question is, the Jewish people are sitting and wasting their time making these little charges. We would love to make medicine. We would love to study Torah. The world would be better off, and we have to just think about how to go make little charges explode. The world would be better off. if the world would just stop fighting with each other.
It's a very good point. The Daily Wire, Christina Pascucci writes the following: anti-Semitic California union prohibits Jewish teacher exodus. It goes on to say during Teach Palestine gatherings, for example, the union offered members curriculum to help educators bring Palestine into their classrooms. A project of the Middle East Children's Alliance, similar union-sponsored strategizing sessions across the state of California, representing a coordinated effort to brainwash children. And there's a lot more information coming out about California teachers unions that is not beneficial to the Jewish people in this state.
There was just something that came out with the Los Angeles Unified Teachers Union where they were trying to figure out how they could essentially indoctrinate the more than 500,000 kids that belong to that district by talking about the Palestinian cause. And I'm going to say what many people have been afraid to say. Teachers have told me that that union has become toxic.
Yeah.
When you think about how kids are suffering, how they're not able to read at grade level, how the dropout rate for LAUSD is twice that of the state of California's average. I mean, these kids are suffering and they need to be put first.
Yeah, Natasha, back to you now. The Wall Street Journal says maybe it's time for Jewish segregation. When the politics of a country swing too far in either direction, anti-Semitism is almost certain to come in its train. The swing today is unmistakably and strongly leftist, and self-segregation strikes me as the first step in combating the attacks on Jews that attend it. I mean, it's one of those things that you think is written in 1938, but the point really is how are you going to protect the Jews from all of these attacks?
Well, the really sad state of affairs is that immigration to Israel by Jewish communities around the world is at all-time highs. We're seeing Jewish communities under threat, as I say, around the world. Coming from the UK, though, and traveling around the United States the last couple of weeks, I have to say the support for the Jewish community here in the United States, I think, is second to nowhere else. And that is an extraordinary thing. It's one that I hope will continue across this election campaign, and one that it would be great to see more politicians making a commitment to support.
Nodding again, Rabbi, go ahead.
You know, she hit the nail on the head, but think about it. Jewish people leaving a country just to have their lives to be safe? Are you kidding me? It shows there's a black mark on the countries that allow people to go and destroy the lives of innocent people. And let's think about it. Who are the ones that are doing it? These are the Palestinian drones, and you're trading the Jewish people that are here to help you in your country? Mind-boggling.
So, by the way, that lady in the green, she ran as for the U.S. Senate in California as a Democrat. Yeah. So here's Nasrallah giving his speech. He says the Israeli invasion, if they're coming to get us now, it will be doomsday. People sitting around everywhere watching him from his undisclosed bunker. Here's a little translation from TV7 in Israel, what he had to say. Should come on here in a second.
I
say to Netanyahu and to Gallant and the enemy's army and entity, you will not be able to return the Israeli residents of the north to the north. You will not be able to return the occupied settlers to the colonies in the north and do what you want. Tuesday and Wednesday were heavy and bloody days for us. They were also a big test. We were able to, with the help of Allah, and I will talk about that shortly, we will be able to overcome this test with pride and with our heads raised high. The important thing is to not let the blow knock you down, no matter how big and strong it is. And I tell you with all reassurance, confidence, and reliance on Allah that this big, strong, and unprecedented blow did not knock us down and will not knock us down, Allah willing.
لم تسقطنا ولن تسقطنا إن شاء الله.
So, from his undisclosed bunker, now killing him, Israel says they know where he is. Killing him would create a big martyr, just like killing Sinwar would create a martyr. I think Gadi Taub or Mike Duran at their Israel Update, which you can find on YouTube and Rumble. Mike Duran is with the Hudson Institute. It's a great update. They do one or two a week, talk about issues. I think Gadi said, if we kill Sinwar now or Nasrallah now, we will create a martyr that will be at the front of radical Islam, even though I don't like that term, against in front of the Islamists for 500 years. He will be a martyr. So more in the speech, he said this was unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that. We've been subjected to a major security and humanitarian blow, unprecedented in the history of our resistance, perhaps in the history of the conflict with the enemy. Never mentions them by name. We know that the enemy has superiority on the technological level because it has American and NATO support. And as he spoke, Israeli jets flew low over Beirut over the speed of sound, setting off sonic booms. The kind of you understand there's this psychological component to this war. So just like I said, they didn't martyr people in a lot of the cases. They made them liabilities and burdens on their family. And then when their guy is speaking, they're racing jets over the downtown Beirut to send a message. Israel crossed red lines. This blow, no matter how big or strong, cannot shake our confidence. It did not bring us to our knees. And he asked the question, can you return the displaced Israeli citizens to the north in the upper Galilee? You will not be able to do that. The price for you to go, that must be high. And so he went on, as usual, if you think I'm long-winded, this guy goes on and on. So we have to do this. And the IDF commander on the northern region is a fool, Nasrallah said, proposed creating a buffer zone in Lebanon. If you think you're building a security belt around the resistance and you think you're limiting fighting to this zone, your military centers will be targeted in the north of occupied Palestine, northern Israel, and even further. And then, so there were some memes that kind of came out about this. This is one of them. This is Nasrallah going in for counseling to his psychiatrist. Kind of reminds you of the story of, I think it was Admiral Nelson. He's involved in a big fight and they're coming at him with cannons. And his assistant said, Admiral Nelson, I think it was Admiral Nelson, aren't you afraid that the men will be afraid when they see the attack that's coming is scaring the you-know-what out of you, causing you to soil your pants? He says, yes, fetch me my brown breeches. So you see Nasrallah wearing his brown breeches on his visit to the psychologist there. And I don't know what happened to that. Oh, well, here's some memes that came up. This is, now Nasrallah is afraid of his Roomba and his rubber ducky. So very creative things that are going on here. Sometimes a little, I guess you would call them insensitive, but nonetheless, this is a very, very big deal. So Mike Duran has a few thoughts. Most astonishing intelligence operations in history, reworking the story of the Trojan horse. In real-life operations like this just don't happen. At least 4 major operations in one. The Israelis thoroughly mapped Hezbollah's supply chain. They invented a special explosive charge small enough to be inserted inside a handheld device, sophisticated enough to be remotely activated, big enough to do real harm. And by the way, these were all, the word today is individually activated, and yet not so prominent physically or electronically to call attention to itself. Israelis turned themselves into a big enough link in Hezbollah's procurement network to take physical control of devices and rig them, and they activated the charges virtually simultaneously across a very wide geographic region. If any one of these sub-operations had been botched, the operation as a whole would have fizzled. Who else in the world could pull off such an imaginative, technically sophisticated, and audacious plot? So here's pictures of things that are happening in Beirut. This article from the Times this morning. Hezbollah is trapped between the hawks and doves. Israel wants to increase the pain. And so, this is an English guy writing, and obviously he's a man of the center or center-left, like, well, this is really pretty awful. So again, you see some pictures here of the pager and the area's main operations of Lebanon and the south, and then the Bekaa Valley, where Israel is looking. I apologize for that. I'm not sure what's going on with it's become very sensitive. Wait, is it beeping? That could be kind of painful. So here's, so what they did, so they map all of this. So you have to think like the Israeli intelligence service. So you have all these guys, they're killed, injured, then at the funerals, their other handheld devices go off. So now what is Hezbollah reduced to? They're reduced to meeting in person to communicate. So what happens, the head of this guy, I can't remember his name, he's the head of the Al Ridwan division of Hezbollah. He has a $7 million bounty on his head by the United States government because he was the one who planned the attack on the Beirut barracks 40 years ago, almost exactly 40 years ago. Some other operations that he did. And so he had a meeting in a basement in a high-rise in Beirut with about 20 other guys. Israel sends a couple missiles in there. He's dead. He's dead along with about 20 other people. And there are about at least 9 top commanders in the Israeli, or in the force. And you can see it took down a high-rise building. And there were a lot of civilians killed in this one. And this was in Al Akbar newspaper yesterday. Hezbollah mourns Akil and his companions on the road to Jerusalem. Israel expands the war with a massive operation that destroyed 2 buildings in the suburb. The founder of the Radwan force, Ibrahim Akil, and its general staff were martyred. And so then this was the page that went up at Al-Manar with all the people that had been eliminated. I'll skip the IDF spokesperson announcement about that. And here, look at these guys. I mean, they've got a lot of people that have been killed in the last. By the way, this is a picture of French flag-draped coffins back in 1983. They were killed in a terrorist operation in Beirut led by Akil, the guy that was just killed by Israel the other day. Macron, by the way, came out, and they did asterisk out the word there. Akil was eliminated by Israel. Macron condemned Israel, saying he stands with Lebanon. Alistair Heath, writing at the Telegraph, said, Israel's bravery has exposed the lie at the heart of Starmer's foreign policy. You can go to the Telegraph and you can find that article. If you do a search on this title, I'm not going to read through it. He does say some important things. Western foreign policy is a mishmash of cowardice, delusion, and contradictions. It sounds like he knows the heart of the United States presidential administration. Iran is a threat to the world. Its alliance with Russia is deepening. Turkey, led by the despot Erdogan, has threatened Israel with invasion, yet remains part of NATO. Qatar, which puts up senior Hamas terrorists in luxury hotels, is a major non-NATO ally of the U.S., home to a crucial Western military base and a major investor in London. This is a guy from the United Arab Emirates. You want to get what do the Arabs think about this? Well, there's a division in the Arab world. So here's a guy, major proponent of the Abraham Accords, the United Arab Emirates. If you go to his Amjad T25 Twitter account, you'll see he puts up he has a video up there early on in the feed that you'll find of a visit to the Abraham family house. Well, all religions are coming together. We're all going to worship as one. And this is part of the issue I have with not part of this, one of the major issues I have with the Abraham Accords. But this is what he said: you dared to strike at a smart and courageous nation on October 7th. So this is an Arab Muslim talking about Israel, committing genocide, kidnapping their children, and violating the women. By the way, that little redheaded baby just turned 1 in the last week or so. Kidnapping their children and violating their women. You thought they would fall, but they rose again, returning after 11 months to correct what had only momentarily slipped, their intelligence. Now they will send you back 1,000 years to a time without technology, where a ringtone feels like a death knell and a beep in a nightmare. And a beep is a nightmare. You will be haunted by your own shadow, too afraid to use any technology, cut off from the advanced world. And they will defeat you not with bullets or tanks, but through the unbreakable will of brave, intelligent people. Over a simple cup of coffee, and with one decisive click, they will seal your fate and the fate of anyone who dares harm their children. This is a nation the world respects. Lebanon, Hezbollah's pager attacks, and today's V-82 strike, that's the strike that killed that founder of the Radwan Brigade for Hezbollah, are not merely military victories. They represent a triumph for the Middle East over radicalism, a victory not only for Israel, but for all who stand against terror. They yearn for a storm, and Israel delivered the storm of justice as it rained fire on them tonight. More about that in a moment. With the strike for humanity, Israel swept away Hezbollah's senior ranks, including Abraham Akil, a phantom of terror who killed 41 Americans, now gone. A time of joy for many, yet a dirge for Hamas, ISIS, and their kin in Gaza. These commanders, reapers of millions in Syria, Lebanon, Israel, faced justice cold bite. This is an Israeli woman writing this: the Middle East is being lit up. Everything is escalating. This has all been going on in the last 24 hours. Lebanon is being bombed heavily, taking out thousands of rocket launchers. Israel found out Hezbollah was going to launch a bunch of rockets. They launched devastating strikes across southern Lebanon. I mean, massive strikes. Now, some missiles have gotten through. Things are going to be extremely difficult for everyone in the coming hours, days, and weeks, including for us. But this is, she's speaking as an Israeli, but this is probably the most necessary war in modern history. It was inevitable, and we have to take the fight to all our enemies. It's time. I really respect smart people. And I'm going to play a long clip of Natasha Hausdorff today, for sure, before we leave. You need to listen to this. And it's only part of an hour-long thing that you can find on YouTube, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. It's time to end their ambitions of wiping us out. This will be a fight to the death, and we will go all in. Whatever it takes, the rules of war are going to go out the window very quickly, and no screaming or protest will stop this now. As Benjamin Netanyahu stated, the entire makeup of the Middle East will change. Said that 1 year ago, yesterday, at the UN. You're seeing a historic pivot point in the Middle East. Now, it didn't go the way he thought when he spoke at the UN exactly 1 year ago. But the entire makeup of the Middle East will change, and I only hope that when this is over, the UN will be dismantled, not destroyed. They have caused us so much of this, all of this. David Friedman, who was the U.S. ambassador to Israel when the embassy moved under the Trump administration, and I always thought I'm going to try to interview these people. I don't know if they'll talk to me or not, but he was at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in D.C. the other day, and he was standing there with my friend Bill Koenig, who I just did a conference with, and he said this: I'm a bankruptcy lawyer. If it was up to me, I'd put the UN into involuntary bankruptcy and make them come out of that completely reorganized. That's a great thought. I mean, he's a bankruptcy lawyer, one of the best ever in history. Very smart guy. And find his Route 60 video that he did. You can find it at Netflix, Amazon, other places. Route 60, the Biblical Highway, with Mike Pompeo. It is well worth your time. So here's Seth Frantzman in today's Jerusalem Post. Israel's actions expose Hezbollah's weaknesses, but it's going to be a very difficult, very long fight. Here's a little interview on Channel 12 in Israel with John Spencer, who went to West Point. I'm only going to play part of this. You can just look up John Spencer's account on Twitter and you can find the whole interview.
During this last year, you were a staunch supporter of the way Israel is conducting its war against Hamas in Gaza. Where do you think these jaw-dropping technological achievements that were demonstrated in Lebanon this week lead us to?
Hopefully, I think, we can still remain hopeful on many aspects. That leads us to this terrorist army stop attacking Israel, and that Israel is finally able to repopulate the entire northern Israel of the tens of thousands of Israelis that were forced to move because of this terrorist army, this Iranian Islamic regime proxy attacking every day since October 8th.
This was a phenomenal technological show, almost a fireworks display. But is this enough, in your opinion?
So I can't speak for irrational terrorists, but it's definitely historic and unprecedented in the impact, not only in the technology, the secrecy, the intelligence required to achieve this. I mean, I can't find a parallel in military history, whether even Stuxnet or breaking of the German code system. But to have that level of surprise and impact of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists being injured, but more psychologically that Hezbollah, because it wasn't just pagers, now it's walkie-talkies, cell phones, Hezbollah can't trust a single piece of their equipment. You would think it would be an amazing, not just deterrence, but it had a huge impact, both physically and psychologically. I don't know if it will be enough because this terrorist army is irrational, but it doesn't blow its nose without Iran's permission.
So go watch that. So this is a map of Israel. Gaza will be down here in the lower right. To Lebanon, you see Beirut on the peninsula up here. The black line in the middle is the Israeli border with Lebanon. It is in this area along the border that all these towns and villages in Israel have been evacuated. Now, Nahariya has not yet. 80,000 people have left their homes. This is the Lebanon border. This is the area of Metula. This is Majel Shams. This green area is the Golan Heights, the Sea of Galilee. And so about 10% of the country has been forced to move south. Well, 10%. 10% of the country area, this is largely agricultural area here along the border, it's been forced to move south. It's having a huge economic impact. Now, the resolution 1701 at the UN said that here, this is the Litani River. So this is about, let's call it 8 to 10 miles, except when it gets over here near Metula, which is right here in this little triangle, it's less than 2 miles away. So resolution 1701 said Hezbollah, no military activity by anybody south of the Litani River. And that's going to be enforced by UNIFIL, the UN fighting force, which the only thing they seem to be effective at is generating sex abuse allegations wherever they go, but that's another story. So you can see here, this is the what's called Judea Samaria, the West Bank. Nablus is Jenin, that's Nablus there. Boy, I'm not doing anything there, so if that's a beep that I should be warned about, nice knowing you. So what's happened is Israel did a big operation here in the last 48 hours, taking out launchers, military operations. This is Cradle, which is not a pro-Israeli publication, but 100 raids across southern and eastern Lebanon over the last hour. Netanyahu applying pressure, a lot of things. Here's a video of a attack in Lebanon. You can see these are these massive explosions that are taking place. So here's another picture of that. The Israeli IDF has put restrictions on people in the north of Haifa. So this area, so here's Haifa. That's the harbor by Haifa. Nahariya would be there. That's Rosh Hanikra at the border. Those oil platforms and everything are out here in the ocean. So everything down in this region is the people are being told you need to be careful, you need to evacuate. I mean, here's a picture of some things that happened in, this is a picture of an attack in Nazareth. Nazareth is 70% Arab. Hezbollah is bombing Arab towns and villages within Israel. Israel has 2 million Arab citizens, at least, maybe 2.5 million. And so Hezbollah doesn't care, because their goal is what? On the road to Jerusalem. We'll destroy everything on the road to Jerusalem. We don't care if it's other Arabs. They must be complicit or they wouldn't be living in Israel. They're the enemy. This was a warning video that I think was put up by the Israeli Air Force. If you launch rockets towards Haifa, Beirut will catch fire. And so these are attacks that took place in Israel just in the last, I mean, these were when I woke up this morning looking at my Zophar app, Zophar. You can see all these places down into Haifa, into central Galilee, even up along like Capernaum was attacked and some other places. So this is a big deal. This is a rocket. Kind of shows what happens when the IDF has a chance to shoot these incoming rockets down. Here comes the incoming rocket. And then here comes the defense, boom. It's pretty amazing technology that they're using. Carolyn Glick tweeted this morning. Haifa will be Kiryat Shemona B. Kiryat Shemona is essentially empty. Nobody up there. There's a restaurant somebody went to recently, and they said the only people eating there are soldiers that are up there defending Israel. A lot of IDF equipment. Soldiers have been taken from Gaza, moved up there, including some elite units. Despite the impressive performance, so if we don't enter the bottom, which she means the southern part of Lebanon, that's the translation from Hebrew. Despite the impressive performance, the Air Force is not a strategic arm. Only the ground forces are able to overwhelm the enemy and bring a strategic victory. She's exactly correct. But look how this is reported. Okay, so when there's an attack, an Israeli strike on a school kills at least 22 people, Gaza Health Ministry says. What should that headline have said if it was accurate? An Israeli strike on Hamas kills at least 22 people. They just happened to be in a school, what people were calling a school. This is a video of what shows what kind of goes on in what they call Gaza Wood. These are Palestinian Arabs that have bought IDF soldiers, and they dress up as IDF soldiers, and then they go through and they make videos of IDF soldiers supposedly committing atrocities. And then they get posted to social media. You see how this goes? I mean, you don't really see the Israeli soldiers wearing tennis shoes too often, right? And so this right here, this kind of, there you go. That shows like the command of the Radwan Brigade. You see all those people have been eliminated in that strike. It's a tremendous operation. I mean, it's just crazy. Gideon Saar, who was touted as a replacement defense minister, this is Jerusalem Post this morning, says that he's not interested in the job. So that's part of his Israeli attacks abruptly end the status quo. And of course, Anthony Blinken had to weigh in on this when he was in France.
All sources, it's not close. Here to discuss is retired four-star General Jack Keane. General, he's talking about Gaza. We're talking about Lebanon. They said the IDF pulled off the second largest official attack on Hezbollah of the year last night.
Okay, you can go to Fox News and find that. There was a resolution adopted at the UN, introduced a week ago Friday, was adopted on Wednesday by a vote at the UN General Assembly in the debate. And what's it say? Well, Israel, get out of the occupied territories, including the West Bank, all of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. In other words, no Jews are allowed in those areas. Oh, we can have Arabs wherever we want. This is what the world says. This is an attack on Jerusalem. What does Bible prophecy say? The world will come against Israel and against Jerusalem in the latter days. And we see this happening right in front of us. 124 countries of the world voted in favor of this. Here's Danny Danon at the UN, just a little bit of his speech during the debate.
Perhaps you have forgotten, but we did not start this war, nor did we choose it. We are fighting a war forced upon us. We are fighting for our homes, our families, our future. We fight because we have no other choice. Yet, despite the cruelties we have faced, despite the unprecedented terror unleashed upon our people, this assembly remains silent.
They've not done anything. So here was the vote that took place. 124 in favor, 14 against. You can see that Micronesia, Israel, Fiji, Czech Republic, Malawi. This is the voting result that they did. 43 countries abstained because they don't have the courage to make a statement or anything. Then they had a big debate Friday at the Security Council. But here is the Czech Republic representative at the UN, ambassador to the UN, what he had to say. I think this is interesting.
Given the current circumstances on the ground, we believe that this resolution is not a step in the right direction, as it risks potentially sowing further divisions and hindering peace talks in an already fragile conflict situation. Furthermore, the adopted resolution fails to address the immense security challenges Israel faces, including Hamas's use of the Gaza Strip as a launching pad for its rampage of killing of Israelis, while systematically using the Palestinian civilians as human shields. Allow me to take this opportunity to reiterate our call for the immediate release of all the hostages brutally abducted on the 7th of October. It is with great concern that I must note that this General Assembly has once again failed to acknowledge this issue with today's vote.
Let me just make a suggestion. If you're looking for a country to invest in, Czech Republic might be one that you would want to take a look at right now, because they're taking the right stand. They're courageous. I appreciate them. So this is the JNS, UN General Assembly, passes a resolution calling for Jerusalem Old City to be Jew-free. And it says they have 12 months to get out. What Zechariah 12 said, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. So that's what's coming. Zechariah 14, I will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. By the way, Bill Salas, my friend, and did a thing with him and Tom Hughes, I guess a week and a half ago, on Hope for Our Times, and he thinks that these are two different events, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14. I tend to agree with him. So after the Security Council, listen to all these people twaddle on about, injustice and Israel bad, and they did a news conference. So here is the Lebanon ambassador to the Lebanon foreign minister. This is what he had to say at what they call the press stakeout.
Israel would not be able to return the displaced Israelis as long as there is war. And Israel would never have a war to win. Israel is not going to win the war. The war would continue no matter how many people die and no matter how many land is really wiped out by white phosphorus.
Okay, well, that's pretty clear, right? Israel's never going to win the war, but we care so much about the Palestinians. Oh, do we really? Here's a tweet I found this morning. If Lebanon cares so much about solidarity, send this to the Lebanese foreign minister. If Lebanon cares so much about solidarity with Palestinians, why do they force them to stay in refugee camps? Have I not asked this question a bunch of times? Palestinians in Lebanon are denied basic rights like owning property, and almost half of them live in overcrowded, impoverished refugee camps. They are banned from working in 39 professions, including lawyers, doctors, or engineers. By the way, in Israel, they're lawyers, doctors, and engineers. Now, a lot of people say, oh, look at how bad Gaza is. That's not Gaza. That's the Yarmouk refugee camp in Damascus, Syria, that the Russians and Syrians bombed into Bolivia because they wanted to get the Sunni Arabs to move somewhere else. Of course, Khomeini comes out and says, this is the first step to increasing the unity of the Islamic world against this criminal enterprise. The Zionist gang that has usurped the land of Palestine is for Islamic countries to completely cut off economic ties with it. This is the least that can be done. By the way, the General Assembly resolution that was adopted says stop selling offensive weapons to Israel completely. Now, I know what they'll do, Israel. They'll make their own. They're very innovative. But, they're trying to put them in a very impossible position. So this is kind of ironic picture that was with Carolyn's article last week on Oslo turning 31. Now, one of the things they claim is that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, I'm going to go about 15 or so more minutes. I got a minute clip, and then I got the great Natasha Hausdorff. And then somebody needs to come up here and tackle me or shut off my microphone. So I stopped because I have a bunch more stuff. Okay, so International Court of Justice, everybody says, oh, they said that Israel's occupier, Israel's not, legal, all of this stuff. So here's one of the judges who used to be on the ICJ, interviewed on the BBC. Now, I bring up the BBC because there was a report that came out this week, and I'll be talking more about this in the future. It's called the Asserson Report. A UK lawyer, there's on Revelation TV, Middle East briefing, with my friend Simon Barrett, talked to the attorney who wrote this report. It's incredible. They used AI to look at all the media on the BBC. 1,500 times the BBC violated its own ethical rules about how it discussed Israel and the conflict with Gaza and Lebanon. 1,500 times. Very accurate. And so here's a BBC guy asking a question, and it's clear this one would be number 1501 if this had been picked up by the Asserson Report. So I'll talk more about the Asserson Report. Just look up Asserson, ASSERSON report, about 200 pages, very well done. There's a summary if you don't want to read all 200 pages. You should at least look at it. And if I remember this afternoon, I'll try to put a link to where you can get the PDF. So he asked the question. Well, you'll hear the question that he asked to the former ICJ judge, and how she responds to this. And you'll see the bias.
Would it be fair to say, and I'm no lawyer, and many people watching and listening will not be lawyers, but would it be fair to say that the key point that you made your initial order and ruling upon was whether or not there was a plausible case that should be taken on by the court of genocide in the case of Israel's actions in Gaza after October 7, and you quite clearly decided that there was a plausible case? Is it right to say that's at the heart of what you decided?
I'm glad I have a chance to address that, because the court's test for deciding whether to impose measures uses the idea of plausibility, but the test is the plausibility of the rights that are asserted by the applicant, in this case, South Africa. So the court decided that the Palestinians had a plausible right to be protected from genocide, and that South Africa had the right to present that claim in the court. It then looked at the facts as well, but it did not decide, and this is something where I'm correcting what's often said in the media, it didn't decide that the claim of genocide was plausible. It did emphasize in the order that there was a risk of irreparable harm to the Palestinian right to be protected from genocide. But the shorthand that often appears, which is that there's a plausible case of genocide, isn't what the court decided.
Oh, in other words, do you see, this is the way judges do this, right? Bill, you remember being in court a lot. She just told him, you don't have a clue what you're talking about. Very similar to Natasha Halstorf when she was on Fox, when she responded to AOC's comment about international law. She said, well, that's legally illegitimate, or however, I can't say, I don't have a very good British accent. So she just told this guy, you don't know what you're talking about. So this would be example 1501, violation 1501 of the BBC ethics. The guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So the other night in New York City, Natasha Halstorf went to the 92nd Street Y. It's a Jewish organization. I think it's on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And she had an interview with the host there for about an hour, but I'm going to play about a 15-minute clip. She starts off with a very good biblical example. She is Jewish. She talks about somewhere in this talk, I don't know if it's in this clip, about her great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather who went to Israel. And so she went to Tel Aviv, has one of her degrees from Tel Aviv University, lives in London, works with UK Lawyers for Israel. Natasha Halstorf, very important what she says. Biblical lesson first, and then some additional information.
The question of international law is critical when we come to think, what exactly is the issue with Jews living in this area? And when we think about, possible future solutions and peaceful coexistence, if the world can't get on board with Jews living in Judea, then what hope is there for peace in the region? That's why I think we need to look outside of the box and the bubble. And when I refer to the two-state delusion, it's specifically the international community's fixation, obsession with this as the only solution, which it clearly isn't a solution at all, rather than with the issues that we've seen with indoctrination. And when we look at the Abraham Accords, which I mentioned very briefly, I think we see a completely different dynamic, one that provides an awful lot of promise for the region, but one which was only possible on the basis of de-radicalization. The UAE de-radicalized its textbooks. Saudi has done the same very quietly. And that denazification process, which also occurred in conjunction with the Marshall Plan for the rebuilding of Germany after the Second World War, that has to be the starting point. And we have to come to terms with that issue. I'll give you another biblical reference. Please. And you can tell me what you think about this.
Can't wait.
Moses walked the Jews through the desert for 40 years. Why? It doesn't take 40 years to cross from Egypt to the land of milk and honey. But the explanation I received is that when the Jews left Egypt, when the Israelites left Egypt, they were left a generation of slaves. And for them to be able to build their own free country, that generation needed to change. And that takes 40 years. And the longer we allow Palestinian children to be abused in kindergartens, to be indoctrinated in this way, every single year we are pushing peace away another 40.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that that the notion that we needed the 40 years in the desert in order to us to, by the way, that generation didn't make it in, right? So the generation that left Egypt did not make it in, and ultimately they were unsuccessful in deprogramming themselves. They cried when the spies came back and so on. All of our stories speak to that. And I think that as we pivot towards 10-7, I think one of the things that really strikes me from what you're saying is the de-radicalization and the notion that that somehow we're on an even playing field in many of these moral conversations. That somehow a culture that it's inevitable, and this is a point that's been made by others, that in most Western moral calculations, and the calculus made, if you are desperate, if you are a terrorist or you were led to do violent things, it must be that desperation is what's driving you. And it's a very, and Sam Harris has made this point, and I think it's a salient point. It's from an earlier source that that inevitably leads to blaming the power structure. Like Israel becomes the one who must have driven you to desperation. Otherwise, why else would you do it? But a more, I think, Occam's razor would definitely demand a more elegant explanation is that if you have been indoctrinated since you were a child that all of the land of Israel is occupied by a colonial entity that must be eradicated, right? Or if you are a jihadist, not all those who are in the West Bank and so on are jihadists, but, or if you are now, when we turn to 10-7, are jihadist, there's no Abraham Accords are going to work in some way with jihadists. Like economic prosperity won't be the motivator. And so I agree wholeheartedly with you about the need to de-radicalize. Let's turn towards 10-7 and how your work has changed since then. I mean, obviously, maybe the most perverse and cynical of all reversals that have taken place. And I've often said in my community that we're living in Purim being the holiday of reversals. And since 10-7 has been a complete upside down, topsy-turvy world. And the most, I think, heinous of all of those reversals are the people that were slaughtered on 10-7 and butchered are then being accused in international courts and also in mainstream newspapers, even in the halls of Congress, of being genocidal. And so you are fighting, I'm sure, like as many of us are, against claims of genocidal accusations of ethnic cleansing and other terms. The ICJ, of course, and the ICC, in some way, we can talk about the differences between those two bodies and also talk about, the arrest warrants that were for Bibi and so on. Let's get into that and how your work has been for the last 11 or so months as we come up on the horrific 1 year since that date.
So I'm extremely privileged to work with an amazing organization called UK Lawyers for Israel, and I have been involved in UK LFI for over a decade. Since October, it has become all-consuming, and a great deal of our focus has been on debunking a lot of the libels in international law. Famine, we've done a very in-depth report on the false claims on famine, on the false casualty figures, and we've done submissions to the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. You're right, looking at the ICJ first. Now, this is the UN's highest court. It deals with disputes between states, and it also deals with giving legal advice to the General Assembly. South Africa's application against Israel and its allegation of genocide is particularly morally repugnant and heinous. It is accusing not just the victims of genocide and the Holocaust, and this is where the term came from. Raphael Lemkin, who was a Jewish jurist, coined the term to provide legal terminology to the Jewish experience of being targeted for extermination because they were Jews in the Holocaust, and came up with this term, genocide, which involves the intentional killing of individuals, that you're targeting them because they are members of a group for extermination. It didn't just, take the biscuit, as we say, because of the targeting of the Jews who experienced this in the Holocaust, but also, I think you're absolutely right, there were acts of genocide perpetrated on the 7th of October because Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists crossed the border with the intention of killing Jews because they are Jews. And for the victims of these crimes to be accused of the very crimes that were perpetrated against them is something else entirely. But this is what South Africa has alleged. And I've been discussing, since the court's first provisional measures order on the 26th of January, I've been discussing this in various media, fora, and I remember a South African commentator who was opposite me saying, "Isn't it wonderful?" Immediately after the 26th of January, now we can finally use Israel and genocide in the same sentence and nobody can tell us otherwise. And therein was a complete I think, acknowledgement of the PR exercise that all of this was, which has been immensely successful. There is no merit in this claim whatsoever. People frequently say, if Israel's committing genocide, it's probably the worst committer of genocide in history because the population has been going up. But the notion that the intention
is to kill civilians. It's inextricably linked with these allegations of war crimes or targeting civilians and breaches of the law of armed conflict, which are completely the inverse of reality. I've been on the ground in Gaza.
Right, you told me recently.
I was there the week before last with a group of generals from 6 NATO states, and we went in with the 162nd Division a few days after this unit had recovered the bodies of the 6 hostages. And we saw tunnels. There were 200 already discovered along the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Rafah when we were there. I was in one of them. It was enormous. There was soot on the walls because this was somewhere where they run trucks backwards and forwards under the border with Egypt, right underneath an Egyptian army command post. I mean, the notion that the Egyptians didn't know what was going on is somewhat less than credible. But where to start? The measures that Israel takes on the ground in unprecedented situation of urban armed conflict, where the tunnels are a very new phenomenon that no other army has had to deal with in this respect. We had a briefing from the general who was in charge of the approach to tunnel warfare and understood that whereas at the very start of this war, there was reticence, there was real hesitation to go into these tunnels, and that Israel's approach had changed completely. The IDF are now fighting through the tunnels. Their progress through the tunnels is faster than their progress on the ground. And that has been a complete game changer.
I mean, but they learned, right?
Absolutely.
Right, they've been learning as they've been moving through.
Completely, and it's been a steep learning curve, but the learning is twofold. It's to combat the enemy more effectively, but critically, and this is frequently missed in international discourse, it's how to more effectively save the lives of Palestinian civilians on the ground. And the measures that Israel implements in terms of the precautions that it takes, the warnings that it issues, householders are subject to individual phone calls, text messages, warning leaflets that are dropped, humanitarian corridors that are set up, that the IDF protects from Hamas fire as they are trying to prevent civilians from leaving. All of this has contributed to an absolutely unprecedented civilian to combatant casualty ratio, which the IDF estimates at about 1.5 or 1 to 1, 1.5 to 1 or 1 to 1. Now, it is a tragedy that any civilians die, but it is also a reality of any armed conflict.
So it took the New York Times 11 months to finally write an article, which just appeared, I think it was yesterday or the day before, on the strategy, of course, of like how cynical Hamas was in beginning a war, which they knew inevitably, if Israel was going to defend itself, it would result in tremendous civilian casualties, even amongst the most moral of armies.
That's their modus operandi.
Exactly. And so the whole world using genocide, I mean, it must, as a lawyer who knows the actual definition, or the rest of us who don't even need to be legal scholars as you are, know how absurd it is. Yeah. It's just infuriating, and they have succeeded, right, in infiltrating what's permissible in public discourse to make a libelous claim against.
In terms of the PR side of things, absolutely. And just so that people can understand, I mean, a lot of people have, actually on this trip, a lot of the military commanders were asking, what was Hamas's aim here? So they invaded Israeli territory, and by all accounts, they had provisions to last even a couple of weeks. But what did they seek to achieve? They knew that they were ultimately going to be pushed back. And I was trying to explain, well, look, if you watch Arab media and if you understand the indoctrination process, it's just about killing as many Jews as possible. But subsequent to the 7th of October, there is something very strategic about what Hamas have sought to do. Their main aim is to survive, to live to fight another day, to prevent Israel succeeding in its war aims to destroy Hamas as a military and political force. The only hope they have of achieving that is international pressure on Israel to cease its lawful self-defense. And the way they do that is by...
Or internal Israel pressure.
Or internal, absolutely. Yeah,
right.
You're absolutely
Those two things at this moment. And both of them have been orchestrated and engineered by Hamas, right?
And we've seen the monstrous way in which they have played the psychological warfare with videos of the hostages. It's all geared to that. And desperately, unfortunately, that there are many aspects of Israel's response to this, which is playing very much into Hamas's hands, but not on the generation of civilian casualties, because really what we're seeing playing out in the international media is a complete inversion of the reality, and the the casualty figures that Hamas puts out, that are repeated by the international media, this is Hamas propaganda, are false. First of all, they are subject to a number of studies now, as statisticians have said these are clearly inflated and fabricated. Secondly, they do not make any distinction between civilians and combatants. Thirdly, they don't demonstrate how or indicate how these people have died. We know Hamas are shooting their own civilians. We know that they have been bombing civilians as they sought to flee according to Israeli instructions. We also know that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets are falling short in the Gaza Strip. They kill indiscriminately when they fall, unlike Israel's targeted, precise, proportionality assessed strikes. They kill civilians, they kill aid workers. All of these numbers, including natural deaths, are heaped together and presented as though they are civilian casualties. We also know they do not make any distinction between civilians and combatants, neither in terms of their own forces, terrorists dressing as civilians, they're going house to house where they keep weapons caches, and they walk in the street, they pretend to be a civilian, and they fire onto Israeli troops from within civilian houses. This is a very clear method, strategy that they are deploying. And ultimately, it's not to win the military campaign anymore. It is to win the international pressure campaign.
So if you'd like to follow Natasha a little more, go to UKLFI YouTube channel. She's excellent in everything that she does. This is a big deal. So I'm going to be on a podcast called Open Up the Doors with Andy White on Thursday. You can look for that on social media. I think it's on my Facebook timeline. I don't know if I put it on Twitter or not, but if you want to listen to that live, 10 to 11 or 10 to 12 on Thursday morning Eastern time. And we're going to talk about some other things I didn't talk about today, like the Summit of the Future, which is going on right now as we speak at the UN in New York. And we'll probably bring in some AI and technology stuff. Tremendous development there. I'm going to do another technology roundtable with Tom Hughes, Patrick Wood, Britt Gillette, and Scott Townsend on October 15th. That'll start at 7 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, for sure on the FBC outlets, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, maybe Twitter. I haven't been successful in doing that yet. Maybe Telegram as well. So watch for that. A lot of things going on, and then I'll have some other interviews with some people coming up elsewhere. There is a lot going on. What's going on in New York City is very frightening. And so I'll be talking about that Thursday. And I have about 60 slides that I'm not getting through. Well, I take that back. It's only 50. So a lot of things going on that you need to follow. So anyway, let's pray and get out of here and understand we live in a very, very pivotal time. When Netanyahu spoke at the UN a year ago, he said a pivot of history. It's a pivot of prophetic history, in my opinion. And it's happening right now in our present time. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Pray you'll bless us as we go this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel as we prepare as much as possible the world for the coming of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. Bless us this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel. In Jesus' name, amen.